one more story. And I mentioned that child prostitution was something that was also present in Victorian culture, and it did happen. And I would tell you, I would want to tell you another story concerning how a law was changed because of the intervention of a Victorian journalist. So his name was William Thomas Stead. He usually signed his work as W.T. Stead, and he observed. We are in the later part of the 19th century again, so the 80s. He observed that it was actually quite easy to buy the sexual services of a child in London. So he was notified that for £5, and which was of course much more than it is today, but still not a lot of money, you could buy a virgin to deflower, a virgin that would be, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old. So even from the child's mother. This was quite a rampant crime in Britain, especially that the medical opinion of the day. This was some sort of course, misconception, but the Victorians did not know it, and the popular opinion stated that sexual intercourse with a virgin could actually cure a man from venereal disease. So, how do you ensure that your partner is a virgin? Of course, get them very young. And Thomas Stead learned about a woman who was willing to prostitute her daughter for £5. He arranged the meeting. He paid the money. He was left alone with a 13-year-old girl, and of course he did not rape her. He took her away and put her in a boarding school on the continent. And then he was arrested for kidnapping. Not for buying the child for sex, but for kidnapping. He was actually put to prison. But all the time he was writing articles. He was the editor of quite an influential popular gazette, popular newspaper called the Pall Mall Gazette. And he wrote a series of articles. He called it, in a very Victorian way, the maiden tribute to modern Babylon. So this became a massive story, a massive scandal, and even when he was put to prison for a short time, he was treated with utmost respect and great admiration, both in prison and after he left. And action, this provocation, actually led to the change of the law. The Parliament passed what was later called Stead Act in honor of this journalist, raising the age of sexual consent from 13 to 16. So something could be done, something could actually be achieved in a very Victorian way, so through the action of whistleblowers that would attract the interest of the Parliament and then lead to the change of the law. So we talked about children and women and homosexuals. Is there anyone left? Anyone abnormal? Of course there are. Of course there are. The poor, for example. So if you know anything about the Victorian living conditions of the working classes, and especially the poor sections of the working classes, they were swarming. The living quarters of the poor were swarming with children. Those children were living in horrible conditions. They were very often malnourished. They were very often dying from all kinds of diseases. So in the second half of the 19th century, we are talking about 1870s, some social reformers started to take notice and decided perhaps it was time to educate the poor about contraception. What kind of contraception was available in the 19th century? Hardly any. They didn't have the pill. Well, they did have the condoms, but they were not associated with contraception. But traditionally, this was the invention of earlier time that was meant to prevent the spread of sexually transmitted diseases. So it was more connected with the culture of brothels and prostitution than, let's say, marital sexual relations and contraception. So generally, not much was known about the physiology of human conception. So what the doctors and the pamphlets advised in terms of limiting the size of the family was later marriage, sexual abstinence, and in the last case, the withdrawal method. So basically finishing the intercourse before ejaculation. So they were not very effective methods, but probably abstinence worked, and later marriage maybe. But towards the end of the 19th century, the average family size in the Victorian society started to diminish, and especially among the middle class, the average was no longer 5.5 children, but something around 3. So something was changing, especially the richer sections of the society started to pay more attention to educating their children, upbringing their children, spending more money and more time on each individual child. So they were interested in limiting the size of the family in order to be able to provide better education and better upbringing and more care, and more investment really to the children they actually had. So some people, like the social reformers Annie Besant and her friend Charles Bradlaugh, decided in 1877 to spread the knowledge of family planning to the poor, to those who are really living in squalor, who really needed to limit the size of their families if they wanted to improve their living conditions. So they financed the publication of one of such pamphlets, of course, mostly advocating sexual abstinence and later marriage, but also giving some sort of veiled information about the withdrawal method. And they started distributing this pamphlet among the poor. And surprise, surprise, they were arrested. They were arrested for offenses against public morality, because any kind of talk about sexuality, also in the medical context, this is what they tried to do, and especially to the people from outside this, let's say, legitimized group who could discuss sexuality, was treated as an offense against the law. So they were brought to court, they were persecuted. Um, it finally resulted in their greater popularity, and Charles Bradlaugh was even elected to be the member of parliament in 1880. But it tells you something about the treatment of contraception, the treatment of sexual education, as something potentially dangerous and as something considered immoral. They were not spreading pornography. Pornography was fine in Victorian culture. Any kind of new invention like photography or even early film in the 19th century, the first applications was always pornography. So they had a rampant scene of pornography, of course, available to the rich middle class men and nobody else. Uh, so this brings me back to my initial proposition that, of course, everything in Victorian culture concerning sexuality could be found in Victorian culture because human sexuality is a very broad subject and the behaviors varied, and of course people in private would behave any way they pleased, but not everything and basically hardly anything was considered normal. And as the last thing, I would like you to see the images of what was considered normal, namely, once again, to see a little excerpt from the videos from the course on the history of British art, because this week, accidentally, we talked about the mainstream Victorian art, so there are some images showing the model Victorian family. So the family of Queen Victoria, of course, very often portrayed in the family circle and kind of idealized manner, and also the daily lives of middle class Victorians, especially with the exaltation of maternity and family life of the middle classes and the idealization of children. So you will see some images. I put the PowerPoint presentation from that course in your Moodle as well, so you can see and Victorian art celebrating the normal life, the good moral middle class family life, and I will give you the links to the videos as well. So if you want to see what was normal in Victorian culture, please do that, and perhaps Google some more art from the painters included in the presentation. So that's it, and thank you for now, and we continue next week. Okay, I decided that rather than send you to watch part of another course, I'll just show you some of the images I wanted you to see. You can still find the entire presentation for the art history course in the Moodle section, and if you check out another playlist, you'll find the videos for this week's art history course as well. But for the sake of our discussion of what was and what wasn't normal in Victorian morality, what I wanted to show you are the images of the ideal. Images, first of all, of the royal family and Queen Victoria, and then even more importantly, the images of the model middle class family, at home, and especially women and their roles within the family circle. So it already starts with Queen Victoria, or at least she popularizes this kind of ideal family. We talked about it already. Just to remind you, one of the family portraits of Queen Victoria by her favorite portraitist, the German artist Franz Xaver Winterhalter. This is called the Royal Family 1846. So as you can see, by that time they already had 5 children, 4 more to come, and if you look at this image, it really shows the family on the throne. It really shows Victoria with her husband Prince Albert and 5 of their children, and the positioning of the entire group is quite telling. First of all, if you look, Victoria's hand is resting on the shoulder of the young Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. So he is definitely the most important child here, being a boy and the heir to the throne. He's not the oldest one was a girl, Vicky, if you remember, and we see her on the right-hand side with her sister Alice and the baby. The baby is also another sister, Helena, but it's basically 2 girls learning to be women, learning to be caring for a baby. There is one more child on the left-hand side, and it looks like it's another girl, judging by the clothes, but if you know anything about 19th century fashion for children, you will know it's a boy as well. It's one of the younger brothers of the Prince of Wales, Prince Alfred, I think, and he is just a toddler, so he's wearing the kind of baby clothes that were worn by little boys at this time. So what we have is not only Victoria on the throne in a more or less official setting, but a family on the throne, and especially the way that the children are presented is very lively and playful and not posed and formal like their parents. I think it's deliberate, and it also shows the Queen as a relatable figure for her middle class subjects. This painting was of course made for the Queen, and it now hangs in one of her residences, Osborne House, but before it was displayed there. It went on tour. It basically was shown in art exhibitions, and it was very, very popular. So what we have is Victoria, a few years into her reign, already being a mother of a large family and still enlarging, and presenting a kind of ideal with the strict division of spheres. So the mother being a caring parent. Actually, the fact that she's also the monarch is quite interesting, because at the same time she has to combine 2 very different roles. And let's now look at the response of the arts of the genre painting. So the most popular type of Victorian painting, showing basically contemporary scenes, private lives of regular people in the Victorian period. So a few examples showing this ideal in practice. The first one, you can also find it in the art course, William Powell Frith, Many Happy Returns of the Day. This is from 1854, and it shows the family of the artist himself. This is the man looking straight out of the picture. This is the artist himself, his wife, his mother, his father, and a very large family, mostly consisting of his children. There is a servant here as well, and one of the little girls is sitting at the table, and her chair is decorated with a garland of flowers, and she is the birthday girl. This is a traditional line of birthday wishes, many happy returns of the day. So this is a child's birthday, and the family is gathered at home around the table to celebrate the birthday of this little girl. So what we have is a very loving, large family, also including the grandparents and this obedient and very polite looking servant, all headed by the master of the house, who is at the same time the painter himself. If you know anything about the history of the private life of Mr. Frith, and you can learn it from some documentaries like Jeremy Paxman's The Victorians, the episode called Home Sweet Home tells you all. He was basically a bigamist. He had this wife and many children with her, and somewhere else in London he had another woman. I don't think he married her formally, but he lived with her on a regular basis. He had another set of many children with her, and it kind of worked for a couple of years until he told his wife he was going away for a few days, and suddenly she bumped on him into him in the street, and the whole scheme fell through. So perhaps this is a comment on the reality of life with such ideals. So on one hand, everything is so moral and upright and family oriented. On the other hand, as you can see, it's not so simple. Some more paintings. A very popular painting. The painter himself is not that famous, but this work is quite well known. Charles Westcott, Life Well Spent. The title says it all. This is from the early 60s, and you can see a woman, clearly a middle-class woman, a wife, in her parlor with her children, doing all that a young, dutiful, middle-class wife and mother should be doing. So I think it's inspired by the Winterhalter's view of the royal family, because we have a woman with a group of children, and she's minding the boys. As you can see, there is an older boy. She seems to be instructing him or teaching him something. There is a younger brother, also wearing the kind of baby clothes, standing next to the older boy. Then there is a girl who seems to be the oldest of the family, minding the baby in the kind of cradle basket. This woman behaves a little bit like Queen Victoria, minding the children and teaching them perhaps to assume their segregated gender roles in the future. She is quite, as you can see, able to multitask. So she is talking to the boys and reading something apparently, and knitting a sock, it looks, and the little girl is already learning the same skill. So she's minding the baby and reading a book at the same time. We can only guess what kind of book she is reading. Apparently there was it is lost now. Maybe it was destroyed during the war or somewhere. I only read about it, that there was a companion piece to Life Well Spent by the same artist, and it was entitled Life Wasted. And apparently it showed a similar young woman in a wealthy middle-class interior, but rather than having all those children and doing all the chores and basically being a good housewife and a mother, she was just seated on the sofa reading novels. So yes, she could make a good philologist, but probably not a good Victorian wife. The next one is actually a set of 3 paintings, a kind of series by another mid-Victorian mainstream artist, George Elgar Hicks. And the title of the entire cycle is A Woman's Mission. A Woman's Mission You can look it up on the webpage of Tate Gallery. It is in Tate now, the entire cycle, and you can read more about it. But the titles of individual parts of this tell you quite a lot. So the first one is called A Guide to Childhood. So we have a woman minding a child, a boy again, a boy in baby clothes, teaching him to walk and basically taking care of the child. The second one is called Companion to Manhood, and we have the woman, probably the same woman actually, comforting a man, probably her husband, after he got some bad news. He's holding an envelope in his hand and it's lined in black, and it's a very clear indication that he just received the news of a death of somebody he knew, maybe a family member, a close friend, or someone he cared about. And as you can see, he's quite distressed, and the woman shown in a domestic environment, in a parlor. Again, she is trying to comfort him. And the third one is called a comfort to old age. So a guide to childhood, a companion to manhood, and a comfort to old age. So here we have the same woman making sure that an elderly gentleman, maybe her father, maybe her father-in-law, we do not really know, is comfortable. He looks old and sick and frail, and she is propping up his pillow. So it's all this Victorian ideal of a perfect wife, a perfect mother, also a perfect daughter, especially to old and ailing parents. But each time in these three paintings we have a woman serving men, whether it's a son or a husband or an elderly father, or perhaps it's his father, the husband's father. Anyway, her mission, which is a very religiously resonant word, is to be a kind of angel in the house. This is a very Victorian phrase, the angel in the house. So a woman who is selfless, who is caring, who is very maternal, who doesn't want anything for herself. She just serves the family, and especially here in this case, she serves the men in the family. So it's not the daughters are not involved, the mother, the sister, or anyone, any women that this main heroine might have in her family are not involved here. It's all about the men. It's all about serving men. Now we would see, of course, it's so patriarchal and perhaps even oppressive, despite all its sweetness. But of course, for the Victorians, they saw it as a very positive ideal, and another example of what you could call a life well spent. Two more paintings, one by one of the Pre-Raphaelites, so the famous artistic rebels from the mid-19th century. This is, I would say, the most morally upright of them, William Holman Hunt, and this is a painting he painted on a commission. So the rich industrialist, don't remember his name, Google it, commissioned a painting of his wife and children. The title here is The Children's Holiday, and we have the woman, the perfect Victorian woman from wealthy middle class background in the center, having a picnic somewhere in the garden with the children. So we have 5 children altogether. They are quite tightly knitted family group. You can see an older sister taking care of a younger child, and then two children walking in the woods with some animals. The eldest boy is seen holding a doggy, and this well-dressed middle-class, probably middle-aged woman presiding over the entire scene, serving tea. You might ask yourself, where is the husband? Where is the master of the house? And there are two possible answers. One is he's paying for it all, so he doesn't have to be present. The other one, he is in front of the painting, which is probably displayed in the family home, admiring the effect of Mr. Hunt's work, and it is something quite typical for Victorian family portraits, that they focus so much on women and children that men are sometimes just hinted or not present at all. And the last one I'd like to show you today is by a woman painter called Jane Maria Bowcott. Not a very well-known name, but the painting itself is quite interesting. The title is Preparing Tea. It's also from the 1860s, and it shows an interior again with a view across the window, and in the distance you can see a train approaching, so we can guess the entire story. And with those genre paintings, they're also sometimes called narrative paintings because you can read them like little stories or poems. They tell a tale, and this time you can guess that probably there is a husband coming home on a train from work, and the wife at home is preparing tea, so it's ready and hot when he arrives home. And you can see two children, two daughters this time, playing in the interior. There is always this round table, such a fixture of Victorian homes. And we have an ideal family with an ideal woman and well-behaved children, and the woman is so dutiful, and she prepares the tea for her husband as he returns from home. So that's the ideal, that's your Victorian ideal for you. And okay, so see you next time.